One thing I've realized over the years of, the few short years that I've been here on this earth is that life is full of interruptions. Hey, that wasn't supposed to be funny. Yeah, no, I just know. Life is full of interruptions. It seems like everything I plan on doing, and I don't know if this is like your life or not, but I like to make to-do lists, I like to make plans, I like to do different things, but it seems like every time I lay out a plan, it gets interrupted, it gets changed, it gets switched around. Like the other day I was planning on, one of my hobbies is woodworking, and I like to turn wood, and the other day I was planning on just taking some time. I had like 3 hours of like nothing on my schedule. And I was like, oh good, I just get to go down to my workshop and just spend a little bit of time down there. And as I'm heading down, a phone call happens, and I answer the phone call, and I talk on the phone for a little bit, and then I get a text, and then I have to run over here, and then I got to run over here, and then everything just seems to happen that by the end of the night, I get done, and I didn't even get to make it down to my workshop. And I don't know if this has ever happened to you, where just life just is full of interruptions. As we go through Mark, the book of Mark, and the series that we're in is we're walking through the book of Mark, and my challenge for us as a congregation is that every week to read 2 chapters of Mark a week. And as we read those 2 chapters every week, the sermon will come from one of those passages that we read. And so we're actually, we've done Mark 1 and 2, we've done 3 and 4, so this week is Mark 5 and 6. And if you read through Mark, one thing you realize, that I've realized, is that Jesus' life was kind of similar to ours. I mean, his life was full of interruptions. It seems like every time he turned around, there was another interruption. He would go to the synagogue to teach. And as he would go to teach, people would want to be healed. Earlier in the chapter, he went to the synagogue and he went to teach, and there was a guy, and he heals the guy. And then after healing the guy's hand on the Sabbath, he gets interrupted by the teachers, and they said, well, you can't do that. While he's out teaching, everyone's hungry, so all of a sudden he has to feed 5,000 people. And he's feeding 5,000 people, and he's leaving, and then all of a sudden, as he's walking through a town, there's a lady that's caught in adultery thrown in front of him, and it seems like everywhere he goes, he's just interrupted. The passage this morning that I want to look at is it's a passage of another interruption. Another interruption in Jesus' life. This passage is usually told as 2 different passages actually, but it's really just one entire event that happens. It's about a guy with a 12-year-old daughter that's about to die, and then it's also about a lady that's had a 12-year-long health issue. So I want to give a background where we're going to pick up. We're going to pick up in Mark chapter 5, verse 21. But the background of what has happened so far is Jesus is going around, he's doing miracles, he's doing teachings, and as we read through Mark, Mark is the hurry-up book. It's always immediately Jesus did this, and then right after this Jesus did this, and it reads really fast. So Jesus is teaching, and after he gets done teaching, he tells his disciples, hey, get in the boat, we're going to cross over. So his disciples get in the boat, he dismisses the crowd, and as the disciples are going across this lake, the big storm comes, and Jesus decides to walk on water. And as he's walking on water, it reads like he's actually planning on just walking to the other side, but then his disciples see him and they get terrified. So Jesus calms the storm, he gets in the boat, they get to the other side, and right when they get to the other side, there's this demon-possessed man. And Jesus casts out these demons into some pigs. The pigs go over the cliff, and everyone gets scared, and they said, leave us. So I don't know if he's only there for like a day or a couple hours. I don't know what it is, but they went all the way across. They turn around, they get back in the boat, and guess what? They cross back over to the other side. So this is where we pick up. They are just crossed over. After traveling, they turn around, they come back right away. It says, when Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Jesus crosses over again, and there's a large crowd. And as you read about Jesus, there is almost always a large crowd. At this point, his popularity is spreading, and everywhere he goes, people want to get close to him. People want to see him. People want to hear him. He's doing these miracles. They've heard about him feeding 5,000 people, and they're just getting excited. There's probably even a larger crowd this time because he had probably already been here before. This is probably the same place that he had just left. He had most likely even spoken in their local synagogue a couple times. So they're like, hey, Jesus is back, this man. And if you haven't seen him before, everyone wants to see him. So they just crowd the beach. They crowd the lakeside. And then one of the synagogue rulers named Jairus came there. Seeing Jesus, he fell at his feet, and he pleaded earnestly with him. He said, my little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and lived. Here's interruption number one. He just gets on the side. The crowd begins to gather, and the synagogue ruler shows up. Jairus is his name, and he pushes through the crowd. The crowd, probably everyone knew him, so they probably let him through a little bit, and he gets to Jesus, and he falls down before Jesus. Now, the synagogue ruler in that community, he was one of the most important people in that community. He was very religious. He was the teacher. He was the one that led the services at the synagogue. He was very respected in the community. In fact, he was probably also very rich. Because of this, he probably didn't have too big of a problem getting through the crowd. And he gets through the crowd and he falls at Jesus' feet. A sign of submission, a sign of respect. And it says that he pleaded, he begged earnestly. This word right here isn't just please help my daughter. This is a grabbing his feet. This is a please, please, please. I don't want to let you go. Please. It was this desperation. I don't know if you've ever been desperate. Where you're just like, you're it. I need this. Please. She's dying. My daughter. If you've ever had a sick child, you know how this feels, where you just want to make them well, where if they're sick and they're crying and you're like, I wish I could make you well, but there's nothing I can do. And you do everything you can for them. It says, lay hands on her, she will get well. Jesus was his last hope. Jesus was the last hope, and I'm sure that the synagogue ruler had begged God for healing. I'm sure he had done everything he knew to heal his daughter, and he was desperate. And he's like, God, please help. I'm sure he cried out, God, please help. And then all of a sudden he hears, wait a minute, Jesus? Jesus is back? Jesus can't be back already. Jesus just left. Right? In walks Jesus from the other side of the lake. He had just left. I mean, what are the chances? Imagine being this dad with his daughter saying, wait, what are the chances? This is it. This is the miracle I begged for. What a coincidence. What a great chance. I mean, I don't know if you've ever had one of those moments where it's like, wow, what a coincidence. Or, maybe it wasn't a coincidence. Maybe it was just a God moment. Had this happen to me the other day. I was I was at the bank, and I was saying hi to someone at the bank, and she was in her office, and she was like, she's like, Pastor Drew, she's like, what a coincidence. She's like, I just asked God for someone to talk to, and you showed up. I was like, are you sure it wasn't someone else? What a coincidence. What a God moment. So he runs to Jesus, and he says, look, I have no doubt, Jesus, if you would just come to my house. I love this part right here because there is no if, there is no but, there is no doubt. He's just saying, if you come to my house and lay hands on my daughter, it will happen. Jairus said, Jesus, just do this and she will get better. I know it. I know what's going to happen if you do this. So Jesus, verse 24, so Jesus went with them. Imagine how happy Jairus was at that moment when Jesus said, okay. And they start to head towards his house. And Jairus is like, praise the Lord. I know she's going to get better. God's got this. This is wonderful. And they start to move. But where there's Jesus, there's usually a large crowd. It says, so Jesus went with him, but a large crowd followed and pressed around him. A large crowd was there, so instead of running to his house, instead of making haste, it was a large crowd. It was like a traffic jam. You know, a traffic jam, I've decided, always happens when you need to get somewhere, doesn't it? I mean, if you are ever running late, I guarantee that there's going to be some type of traffic, or a road is closed, or there's going to be a train or something that is going to stop you from getting to where you want to go. It's almost like a guarantee in life. My dad was wonderful at taking the long shortcut. I don't know if anybody else's dad did this, but he was like, if there was any kind of a tractor in the way or any kind of traffic, he would say, oh, don't worry, I know another way. I know a shortcut. And instead of, taking 10 minutes, 30 minutes later, he was like, oh, we finally make it. This crowd is pressing around. It's a traffic jam. I'm sure Jairus is going, get out of my way, get out of my way. We need to go, come on, get out of my way. He's pushing people. He's probably, in football, he's being the blocker. He's trying to open up the way for Jesus, but this crowd just keeps pressing and pressing in. And there's a woman, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She'd been sick for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Interruption number 2. In the middle of an interruption, here comes another interruption. This woman, we have no idea what her name is. It doesn't give us her name. She had been suffering. She had been bleeding for 12 years. She had spent everything on doctors. She had prayed. She had tried this. She had tried that. She had tried everything she could. But nothing worked. This weekend, I was changing brake pads on one of my vehicles, and as I was changing the brake pads, I got to the last brake to change the pad on it. And there's these things called caliper pins on a brake, and what they're made to do is they're made to slide in and out like this to help your brakes adjust when you press them. Well, one of those pins what happens is sometimes they get stuck. The last one on my brakes was completely stuck. I couldn't move it. So I said, well, I've got this. This has happened before. So I get the screwdriver out and I just kind of try to pry it a little bit. And it doesn't work. Doesn't move. Doesn't even budge. So I get a pair of pliers and I put pliers on it and I try to twist it. Doesn't work. So I said, okay, we're going to have to start trying a little harder. So I get the pry bar out. Pry bar doesn't work. I get the hammer out. Hammer doesn't work. I get the mallet out. The mallet doesn't work. By this time, I'm like, okay, I'm going to win. This is not going to win. I don't care what I have to do. I am going to do it. So I get WD-40, doesn't work. I get PB Blaster, it doesn't work. I do both of them at the same time, it doesn't work. I put more grease on it and try to C-clamp. I am trying everything. In fact, I finally get out my blowtorch. And I'm like, I'm either going to burn my car down or this thing is going to get unstuck. I get the blowtorch out, I heat the brake caliper, the everything up, doesn't budge. And I am pounding on this thing. I tried everything I knew. And then I call my dad. Because dads know everything. I call Dad and say, what can I do? He said, sorry, it's gone. It's done. You're going to have to replace the whole thing. Sure, this lady was like that. She was like, I'll just try this. I'll try that. I'll try this. And it just kept getting bigger and bigger. I'll spend my money here. I'll spend my money here. I'll do whatever it is. And eventually, there was nothing left. There is nothing she could do. Leviticus Chapter 15, Leviticus talks about the old covenant law that they were under, that they would follow. And Leviticus 15 explains her condition and the law that she would have been under in her condition. And this is what it says, is that she would have been considered unclean. Which means there's many things that she wouldn't have been able to do. In fact, anything she touched because of her condition would have been considered unclean. It even says if she would sit down on a couch or a chair, if someone sat down on that couch after her, they would be considered unclean because the couch was unclean. She couldn't be touched because she would have been considered unclean. That means that she would have been not invited over to people's houses, because no one wants to deal with that. She wouldn't have been allowed, actually, because she was unclean, she would not have been allowed to worship in the synagogue or even travel to the temple that they would take yearly. They would travel to the temple to worship God at different festivals. She would not have been allowed to do that. She would have been the very picture of an outcast. And she had been in this situation not for a month, not for a year, but she had been going through this for 12 years. She had been an outcast in her own community. Talk about your world being turned upside down. I assume after probably the first month of her suffering, she would have been, well, I got to try this, I got to try that. Then after trying different things, there was no help. Several months. Life started to change. Life started to get a little inconvenient because she's at this point starting to have to change her life because people are like, wait a minute, I don't know if until you get better, maybe, we should just, after a year of it, 2 years, 3 years, 4, life is completely upside down and it looks like it's never going to get back to normal in 12 years of suffering. So this lady, 12 years of suffering, she comes and she says, if I could just touch Jesus. I just need to get close. I have no doubt, I love the same as Jairus. I have no doubt that Jesus can or will do it. I don't know where she got this faith. Maybe she had heard stories. Maybe actually she had heard Jesus teaching when he was there a little bit earlier, but she just couldn't get to him. She just couldn't reach him. Maybe she watched from afar and watched him heal this person and this person and this person. Watched the hand heal right in front of her. Maybe she heard the parables. She says, that's it. He's the one. So she sneaks up behind him, ashamed, alone, the only one that knows what she's trying to do. And she reaches out, she touches his cloak. Just reaches out and just touches part of his cloak. It says immediately her bleeding stopped and she felt in her body that she was freed from suffering. She was healed. She was freed from her suffering. 12 years of suffering over. So she could just feel it happen. Imagine the emotions that would happen knowing that it worked, knowing that all of a sudden you are healed instantly. The happiness, the joy, the relief, almost probably tears would start running down her face. It worked. I'm free. I'm free, that feeling of freedom that you get. The joy, the happiness. I had a dog named Bernie. She was a golden retriever. And she was my dog. I loved her. She was like the best dog ever, other than she would escape. She was like an escape artist. It didn't matter what I did. She would escape no matter what. She'd dig underneath the fence. She learned how to open the gate. She was a genius, but every time she escaped, she would take off running. And when she ran and she was free, she was the happiest dog I'd ever seen. She just takes off and smiling, her ears flopping everywhere. She went and visited the entire neighborhood. In fact, when we lived in West Virginia, she would escape all the time and she'd be so happy that she was free. She visited every one of our neighbors. They knew exactly who she was. They'd call us up and say, hey, I think your dog's at our house. Or they'd bring her back, hey, here's your dog. But she was just so happy because she was free, finally. That joy that we find when we're free. She's healed. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around the crowd and he asked, who touched my clothes? Who touched me? He knew. He knew someone touched her. He knew what happened. The disciples answer, and I love this part, they look and they say, Jesus, you see the people crowding around you, his disciples answered, and yet you can ask, who touched me? Jesus was like, someone touched me, and they're like, Jesus, we're in a crowd. Everyone's touching you. Like, of course someone touched you. I don't know if your kids did this when they were younger, but they ever played the I'm not touching you? Right? You say, if you touch them one more time, I'm turning this car around, and then so they'd stick their face, their finger right here, and I might have did this to my sister several times. Like, I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you. I could see the disciples doing that to Jesus, saying, what do you mean someone touched you? I'm not touching you. Really, Jesus? But he knew, but Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. The woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, trembling with fear. Told him the whole truth. He found her. She was afraid. She began to tremble, afraid of what is Jesus going to do. So she fell down and she told him the whole truth. She said, look, Jesus, I know what I did. In fact, she probably said, I know that touching you is going to make you unclean. I know that touching you is going to make according to the law, you unclean, but I had to. I couldn't help it. She said it with fear because she had no idea what Jesus was going to do. I love his answer. He said, daughter, family. So you're not just a strange woman. You're not just a no-name person, even though we have no idea what her name is. But Jesus looked at her and said, you're my daughter. You're my family. Your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. Go in peace. Not only did she find healing in her body, but probably more importantly, she found the peace and freedom of faith in Jesus. Daughter, your faith has made you well. Now go in peace and freedom. As that's happening, interruption number 3. Remember, everything gets interrupted? While Jesus was still speaking, so while he is caringly loving this lady and saying, daughter, your faith has made you well, while he is speaking, some men came up from the house of Jairus, the synagogue ruler. And they came with this news. They said, your daughter's dead. I said, Jairus, she didn't make it. Why even bother Jesus anymore? Why bother the teacher anymore? She's gone. Jairus, I'm sorry. She's gone. Now, if you've read this already, you know what's going to happen, but I just want to pause at this moment right here. Pause at this moment and put yourself in Jairus' place. That miracle that he was so excited for, that miracle that he knew was going to happen, didn't happen. There's no miracle. Devastated. God's answer must have been no. His hope was gone because no one comes back. Death is final. Imagine the crushing blow that would have been to lose his 12-year-old daughter, knowing that his hope was right there if it wasn't for this crowd that would have stopped him. If it wasn't for this lady that just stopped Jesus, interrupted, his daughter would have probably made it. What good is it now? They said. What good is it now? What good is Jesus now? They said. You know what? It didn't work. What good is Jesus? now. The question is, how could this happen? I mean, I had faith. Could you imagine I had faith. If Jesus would have just hurried, if he wouldn't have even taken time with this lady, why didn't he do what I asked? Here's the thing, God doesn't always work on our time and in our way. Sometimes God has other plans than mine. Sometimes God does something different than what I think I want. Not how, and sometimes God does something in a way that's different. And as he's doing that, and we have this pain, this agony, and this hurt, and we don't know, and it might not look like the miracle will come. I mean, this lady that he just healed, she'd been in that place looking for a miracle for 12 years. It probably felt like a lifetime. This moment for Jairus, it might have been just a few minutes, but it probably felt like a lifetime. Sometimes God works differently than what we think and how we think he should work. Because he's God. Ignoring what they said. Jesus turns around, he ignores what they say. Jesus told the synagogue ruler, don't be afraid, just believe. Don't be afraid, just believe. Don't be afraid, just have faith. How many times has God asked us the same thing? How many times has God said, you know what, I know you don't understand. I know you don't realize what I'm doing, but just believe. Don't be afraid. Just have faith. Just believe me. Trust me. I've got this. It doesn't tell us what the ruler said back or if he said anything. But it does say the ruler followed Jesus. Verse 37, Jesus, he did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. This is Peter saying, look, I saw this happen. So I know this is what's about to happen because Peter was one telling Mark what to write. Peter said, look, I know what is about to happen is going to sound crazy, but I want you to know I was there. I actually saw this happen. There's eyewitnesses of what is about to take place. When they came to the home of the synagogue ruler, Jesus saw the commotion with the people crying and wailing loudly. His daughter just passed away. He went and said to them, why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep. But they laughed at him. They laughed at Jesus. They said, what do you mean? We know what death looks like. She didn't make it, Jesus. After he put them all out, he took the child, father and mother, and the disciples who were with him, and they went where the child was. He took her by the hand, and he said, Talitha kumi, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. At this, they were completely astonished. Or immediately, the girl stood up and walked around. She was 12 years old. At this, they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to tell anyone know about this. Told them to give her something to eat. Jesus comes in and he does the miracle. He says, little girl, get up. And he heals this little girl that was 12 years old. This is amazing. In the same day that Jesus heals a woman that had suffered for 12 years, he gives the father his blessing back of 12 years after he lost her. So what does this have to do with us? What does this tie into us? And here's what I realize is it's all about faith. And the beautiful thing about this is that as we look at this, as we read this event, we realize that, you know what, when it comes to faith, it's not who you are that matters. Look at the contrast between these two characters, these two people. We have Jairus, who is a rich ruler that everyone knows. We know his name. He is following God. He's serving God in the synagogue. He's really, really important. He's got money. He's probably got everything that everyone wants. We have Jairus, and then we have this lady who we don't even know her name, who is an outcast that can't even worship in the synagogue that Jairus teaches at. I mean, you couldn't find two more opposite people, and guess what? They both came to Jesus with faith. It's not how you approach God either. So many times we think, oh, if I could just do it this, and this way. Just tell me how to do it, how to have that faith, and if I can do it A, B, and C, then everything will go right. And it's not how we approach God. This man, Jairus, he came down, he did it what most people consider the right way. He knelt down at Jesus' feet. He laid it out. He pleaded his request. He was respectful and open. This lady came to Jesus and she snuck up behind him. She didn't want anybody to know what was happening. She was sneaking to Jesus and touching him to get healed. It's not who we are. It's not how we approach God. It's not even what we need. So many of us has different needs that we come to faith to be met. A job, or a healing, or a relationship that needs mended, or salvation, or food, or comforting, or intervention. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. We have so many needs that we come to God in faith, and it's not what we need. They both needed different things. Jairus came on behalf of someone else. She came on behalf of herself. Here's what's amazing. There's nothing in our lives right now that God can't handle. Even death could not stop Jesus. So what is it? What is it about the faith? What is it when Jesus says, just believe, just trust? It's not who we are. It's not how we approach God. It's not what we need. Faith is all about who it's in. Faith is all about having faith in Jesus. We can put our faith in so many different things, and it fails over and over and over again. But it's our faith in Jesus Christ, Jesus the Messiah, God's Son, that makes all the difference in our lives. Jesus said, just trust me, just believe. It was your faith that made you well. Even when it takes too long, even if it's not how you expect it, just believe. And when we do, many times we find, like that lady, that we get more than what we asked for. We get peace and freedom. This morning, I just encourage you, or ask you to look at yourself and say, where do I need to put my faith? Or who is my faith in? Ask our worship team to come forward. If you'd stand as we worship, finish with this song. I just want to encourage you to put your faith in Jesus. And remember, it's not about who you are, what you need. It's all about who your faith is in. That's Jesus. Let's worship him.